Prepare for departure. The order arrives in cold blue ink. Captain Suvorov's pencil shakes as he reads it, because he knows what Pacific Fleet Command refuses to admit. K-429 isn't a submarine. She's a murder weapon aimed at his own crew. Numerous critical systems dead. Reports suggest as many as 17. 42 sailors who've never felt a dive. Hull valves his engineer can't trust. And in 6 hours, Suvorov has to choose: mutiny and face the firing squad, or submerge and face something worse. He's already filed the report, already said no. The answer came back in writing. At 40 meters depth, seawater will hit the battery compartment and the lights will die. 104 men will realize the only exit is a torpedo tube wide enough for one man at a time. And in the darkness, they'll start to understand what Suvorov already knows. Someone wanted K-429 at the bottom of the Pacific. The Navy will call it crew error. Suvorov will call it murder. But here's what neither will say out loud. According to survivor accounts, the reports that could prove it disappeared from command safes before the investigation began. This isn't the story of how a submarine sank. It's the story of why it was never supposed to surface. June 1983. K-429 sits pierside at Rybaki Naval Base in the Soviet Pacific Fleet. She is a Charlie-class nuclear attack submarine, diesel backup and torpedo armament, undergoing an overhaul with major systems disabled for maintenance. Available records indicate numerous systems were tagged out of service. The crew roster shows 42 men who have not completed dive certification. Fuel transfer valves leak. The Snorkel induction system has not been tested since yard work began. Reserve buoyancy is marginal at best. Suvorov reportedly compiled a detailed assessment of the deficiencies, his executive officer trailing behind with a clipboard, marking each one. Historical accounts suggest the list was extensive. A submarine is supposed to be a sealed pressure vessel. K-429 is a collection of open questions held together by optimism and rust. Pacific Fleet Command signals Suvorov directly. According to available records, he's ordered to get underway for live-fire torpedo exercises. Destination: a deep-water range off Kamchatka. Multiple surface ships and aircraft are already dispatched. Exercise schedule cannot be delayed. The signal lists grid coordinates, torpedo safety zones, communication frequencies. It does not list time for hull integrity checks or crew drills. Suvorov reads it twice. Then he calls his senior officers to the wardroom. The navigator spreads a chart. The chief engineer shakes his head. They all know what minimal preparation time means. No time to test the snorkel valve under pressure. No time to run emergency blow drills with the new men. No time to verify that the ballast tank vents actually close when you pull the lever. It means you button up the boat and hope nothing breaks at depth. Suvorov drafts a written protest to Pacific Fleet Command. He lists specific deficiencies by system and compartment. According to available records, concerns included problems with the fuel systems and diesel leaks. Snorkel induction system not tested post-refit. 40% of crew untrained on emergency procedures. Ballast tank vents sticking in the open position. He requests additional time to complete systems checks and run dive drills. The protest is typed and transmitted. Suvorov signs it and hands it to the radio operator for encryption and transmission. In Soviet naval doctrine, a written protest is the last resort. It puts your objection in the official record. It also puts your career on the line. Suvorov knows this. He sends it anyway. Then he waits for the reply. Fleet Command reportedly rejected the protest shortly thereafter. The reply is brief. Exercise involves multiple surface ships and aircraft already dispatched. Schedule cannot be altered. K-429 will sail on time, or Captain Suvorov will be relieved for failure to follow orders. There is no negotiation. No offer of additional support or expedited repairs. Just the threat of relief, which in the Soviet Navy means disgrace and the end of a career. Suvorov reads the reply in front of his officers. No one speaks. The choice has been made for him. Refuse and face court-martial for insubordination. Comply and take an unready boat to sea with an untrained crew. Faced with no alternative, Suvorov ordered the crew to button up the boat and prepare to get underway. Suvorov orders the crew to button up K-429 and prepare to get underway. Sailors scramble to close hull access plates and stow scaffolding. According to available records, the chief engineer voices concerns about the boat's operational readiness. Reserve buoyancy is reportedly below normal, with ballast tank vents still sticking from the incomplete yard work. The snorkel valve has not been cycled under pressure since the yard work began, but there is no time left to test it. Deck crew disconnect shore power and pull the gangway. Line handlers stand by on the pier. K-429's reactor is critical, and her screw begins to turn. She backs away from the pier under her own power. The crew watches Rybachi recede into the gray horizon. Suvorov stands on the sail, knowing that every mile farther from port is a mile deeper into a trap he cannot escape. K-429 is moving now. Below deck, every system that kept her afloat is being tested for the first time since refit. And there's one piece of equipment no one has actually verified will work when it matters most: the snorkel induction valve. A hydraulic flapper sitting at the top of the air intake mast. When the boat runs on the surface, or at periscope depth, it stays open so diesel generators can pull in air. When K-429 dives, that valve must seal tight, or seawater floods straight into the diesel compartment. The flapper is held closed by an internal spring. A hydraulic actuator, powered from the main bus, pushes it open or pulls it shut. Simple enough. Except, historical accounts suggest that during the refit, the valve may have been physically locked open for ventilation, and the monitoring system was improperly calibrated. No full pressure test with the mast submerged was conducted. On paper, the valve is operational. In reality, no one knows if the mechanism will actually seal against sea pressure. Suvorov's chief engineer mentioned this in the written protest. Command did not reply to that line. The indicator light on the bridge shows green, closed, sealed. But that light only tells you the actuator moved. It doesn't tell you if the flapper is actually holding back the ocean. The snorkel valve has a manual backup, a hand wheel in the forward machinery space. If the hydraulic actuator fails, a man can crank the wheel and mechanically close the flapper. In theory. In practice, the hand wheel is accessible only when the boat is at periscope depth with low sea state and minimal crew traffic. During an emergency dive, men are running to damage control stations. The passageway to the hand wheel is blocked by bodies and equipment. The chief engineer briefs Suvorov on this constraint during the transit to the exercise area. If the hydraulic system fails during a rapid dive, there will be no time to reach the manual override before water pressure forces the valve open. Suvorov asks how long they have. The engineer estimates 30 seconds from the first alarm to total valve failure. 30 seconds to fight through a packed passageway, reach the hand wheel, and crank it shut. The engineer does not say it is impossible. He does not have to. To meet the 6-hour deadline, the deck crew skips the pre-sail hull integrity check. Standard procedure calls for a visual inspection of every ballast tank vent and hull valve before getting underway. Instead, the crew uses gauge readings from the previous day and marks them acceptable on the log. 2 ballast tank vents are noted as sticky. They do not fully close when actuated from the control room, but they are close enough. The senior petty officer responsible for the log signed off on the checks. No one walks the tank tops to verify the vents by hand. No one cycles them repeatedly to see if they free up or seize completely. K-429 gets underway with minimal reserve buoyancy because those partially open vents are already bleeding air from the ballast tanks. The margin for error is gone before the boat clears the harbor. K-429 heads into Serenaya Bay near the Kamchatka Peninsula, running on the surface toward the exercise grounds. Sea state is moderate, 2-meter swells rolling in from the east. The boat rides easily at 12 knots. Suvorov reviews the exercise plan with his officers. Submerge to periscope depth, run a simulated attack approach on the surface group, then fire 2 practice torpedoes with dummy warheads. Simple navigation drill. Routine tasking. Except the snorkel valve is untested and the ballast vents are sticking, and 42 men have never felt the bow angle of a controlled dive. Suvorov keeps these thoughts to himself. The crew works the pre-dive checklist. Hatch seals verified. Trim tanks balanced. Diesel generators secured. Everything looks normal on the status boards. But normal is an illusion built on shortcuts and hope. In 20 minutes, Suvorov will order the dive and the illusion will shatter. Suvorov orders the boat to periscope depth. The diving officer opens the ballast tank vents and seawater rushes into the tanks, increasing the boat's weight. K-429 begins a controlled descent, bow angling down 5 degrees. The depth gauge needle sweeps past 10 meters, then 15. The snorkel mast stays up, diesel generators still running, pulling air through the induction valve. At 18 meters, the diving officer signals, "Snorkel secured." The hydraulic actuator hums, and the valve begins to close. But, according to technical reconstructions of the accident, it does not seat properly. The actuator appears to stall, failing to achieve full closure. A thin jet of seawater sprays into the diesel compartment. The watch engineer sees it immediately and calls the control room. Before anyone can respond, it is believed that increasing sea pressure overcomes the weakened seal. Water begins flooding the compartment at 400 liters per second. Alarms scream, men shout. Water pours into the diesel compartment and races aft through the lower deck. The diving officer watches his trim indicators spin. Forward trim tank shows rising weight. The bow begins to pitch downward. Men grab stanchions to keep their footing. Suvorov orders bilge pumps to full capacity. But according to technical reconstructions, only 2 pumps were operational, and their combined capacity was quickly overwhelmed. Water reportedly surged through the snorkel valve faster than the pumps could compensate. The boat is gaining weight faster than the pumps can remove it. K-429 loses trim and pitches bow down. The depth gauge needle accelerates past 25 meters. Crew in the forward compartments wade through knee-deep water. Equipment floats free. The diving officer calls out depth every 5 seconds. 30 meters. 35. The boat is no longer diving. She is sinking. Seawater reaches the electrical panels in the diesel compartment. 400 volts arc across salt water, and the main bus shorts out. Branch circuits cascade in sequence. Forward bilge pump dies. Compartment lighting dies. Hydraulic pump that could close the snorkel valve remotely dies. The boat plunges into darkness, except for battery-powered battle lanterns that cast weak red pools of light. Emergency lighting flickers on in the control room. Suvorov can barely see his instruments. The depth gauge is still lit. 38 meters? 40? The electrical short has killed the systems he needs to stop the flood. The snorkel valve is locked open, and there is no power to move it. The primary bilge pumps have failed, leaving the crew with virtually no means to counter the massive influx of water. Men fumble in the dark, trying to close manual valves by feel. The boat shudders as the descent accelerates. Impact is seconds away. Suvorov orders emergency blow. Compressed air into all ballast tanks. The procedure is automatic and absolute. High-pressure air at 200 bar should displace water from the ballast tanks and drive the boat to the surface. The chief of the boat pulls the lever. Air hisses into the tanks. But critical valves, whether ballast vents left partially open or the main ventilation system still flooding the hull, allow air to escape before it can displace enough water. The boat's ascent slows, but does not stop the descent. The submarine plunges deeper, reportedly approaching 40 meters and still dropping. Suvorov repeats the order. Emergency blow again. More air. Same result. The vents bleed pressure faster than the system can build buoyancy. K-429 accelerates bow first toward the seabed. Suvorov braces for impact. Men crouch and grab anything bolted down. The collision is going to be brutal. K-429 hits the seabed at 40 meters depth. Thanks to Suvorov's emergency ballast blow during descent, survivor accounts suggest the boat settled relatively softly onto the mud, though the chaos inside was real. Equipment shifted. Men struggled for footing in the sudden darkness. The boat came to rest with a list to port, historical records citing approximately 15 degrees. Seawater is now knee-deep in 3 compartments and still rising. The reactor automatically scrams, cutting all main power. Only battery-fed emergency systems remain. Red battle lanterns provide the only light. Suvorov picks himself up from the deck and checks for broken bones. According to accounts of the chaos in the control room, his executive officer was among those injured. The diving officer reports depth holding at 40 meters. The boat is on the bottom and no longer sinking. But the flooding has not stopped. The snorkel valve is still wide open and the compartments continue to fill. Suvorov keys the intercom and orders all hands to the forward torpedo room. Abandon ship! The snorkel valve uses a simple flapper held closed by an internal spring. Under normal operation, the hydraulic actuator pulls the flapper shut and the spring keeps it sealed against the valve seat. When the actuator fails at partial closure, external sea pressure overcomes the spring force. At 40 meters depth, ambient pressure is 4 bar, roughly 60 pounds per square inch. That pressure acts on the entire surface area of the flapper, generating hundreds of pounds of force pushing inward. The partially closed flapper cannot resist. The pressure forces the valve fully open backward, hinging it in the wrong direction. The resulting opening, estimated at 150 millimeters, floods directly into the diesel compartment. At that opening size, seawater reportedly floods at roughly 400 liters per second. That is faster than 2 bilge pumps combined can remove water. The boat gains weight steadily and loses buoyancy even with pumps running at full capacity. Once the valve opens backward, there is no mechanical way to close it from inside without reaching the manual hand wheel, and that becomes impossible the moment the crew runs to emergency stations. Seawater contacts 400-volt electrical panels in the diesel compartment. Salt water is an excellent conductor. Current arcs across the panel terminals and the main distribution bus shorts out. The short cascades through branch circuits in sequence because all branch feeds tie back to the main bus. Forward bilge pump circuit trips. Compartment lighting circuits trip. Hydraulic pump circuit trips. Each system dies within seconds of the initial short. The electrical cascade kills the forward bilge pump, cutting total pumping capacity by half. It kills the hydraulic pump that powers the snorkel valve actuator, eliminating any chance of closing the valve remotely. It kills compartment lighting, forcing the crew to work in near-total darkness. Emergency battery-fed systems remain active, but they cannot run bilge pumps or hydraulics. The cascade takes less than 10 seconds and leaves the crew with no tools to stop the flood or restore buoyancy. The emergency blow system uses compressed air stored at 200 bar pressure in high-pressure flasks. When activated, air flows into the ballast tanks to displace water and generate positive buoyancy. For the system to work, the ballast tank vents must be closed so the air stays trapped inside the tanks. K-429's 2 forward ballast vents are stuck partially open from the pre-sale deficiency. When emergency blow air enters the tanks, it escapes through the open vents before it can displace sufficient water. The rate of air loss through the vents exceeds the rate at which the system can build pressure inside the tanks. The boat gains some buoyancy, slowing the descent, but it cannot generate enough lift to overcome the flooding weight and drive the submarine to the surface. Suvorov orders emergency blow twice. Each attempt depletes the high-pressure air supply without achieving positive buoyancy. The boat continues to sink until it hits the seabed. The emergency blow system is intact and functional. The stuck vents make it useless. At 40 meters depth, ambient pressure is 5 atmospheres. That means every lungful of air a man breathes is compressed to 1/5 its surface volume. A torpedo tube offers the only escape route. Each tube is 533 millimeters in diameter and 7 meters long. A man must enter the tube, seal the inner door behind him, flood the tube to equalize internal and external pressure, open the outer door, and then ascend 40 meters on a single breath. During ascent, the air in his lungs will expand 5-fold as pressure drops. If he holds his breath, his lungs will rupture and air will enter the bloodstream, causing arterial gas embolism and likely death. He must exhale continuously during the ascent to vent expanding air. The window to reach the surface is perilously narrow. Consciousness can fade rapidly as oxygen levels drop during the ascent. Ascend too fast, and nitrogen dissolved in his blood will form bubbles, causing decompression sickness. Ascend too slow, he will drown. The torpedo tube was designed to launch weapons, not evacuate men. But it is the only way out. Suvorov orders abandoned ship through the torpedo tubes. Survivors crowd into the forward torpedo room in chest-deep water lit only by battle lanterns. The weapons officer and 2 torpedo men rig the forward tubes for human transit. They remove the 2 practice torpedoes and coil a rope guide inside each tube from inner door to outer door. The rope gives a man something to pull on during the blind transit through the flooded tube. Each tube becomes a 7-meter escape shaft. The weapons officer runs the procedure once as a drill, using himself as the test subject. He enters Tube 1, seals the inner door, cracks the flood valve, waits for equalization, opens the outer door, and pulls himself into open water. 20 seconds later, he surfaces. The procedure works. Now they begin cycling the men through the tubes in near total darkness, with seawater rising in the compartment. Men queue in the flooded torpedo room. Each man gets a 30-second briefing from the torpedo man. Enter the tube feet first. Pull the inner door shut behind you and dog it tight. Crack the flood valve. Water will rush in and pressure will spike. Your ears will scream and may rupture. Wait until pressure equalizes and you can push the outer door open. Grab the rope guide and pull yourself hand over hand out of the tube. Once you clear the outer door, kick for the surface. Exhale continuously on the way up. Do not hold your breath or your lungs will rupture. 45 seconds from tube to surface. If you panic or stop exhaling, you die. If you ascend too fast, nitrogen bubbles will form in your blood and you die. The briefing is clinical. There is no time for comfort. Each man nods and steps to the tube. The first group enters. Inner doors seal. Flood valves open. The escape begins. First man enters Tube 1 and seals the inner door. Total darkness. He feels for the flood valve and cracks it open. Seawater rushes in around his legs, then his waist, then his chest. Pressure spikes as the tube floods. The rapid pressurization causes intense physical pain, in some cases severe enough to rupture eardrums. He cannot see. He cannot hear. He can only feel water rising and pressure building. 20 seconds pass. Pressure equalizes at 5 atmospheres. He pushes the outer door. It resists, then swings open. Black water surrounds him. He grabs the rope guide and pulls himself hand over hand toward the outer door. His lungs are compressed to 1/5 normal volume. Under the extreme physiological stress of the escape, his window of useful consciousness is likely measured in seconds. He clears the tube and kicks upward into open water, 40 meters to the surface. He exhales continuously as his lungs expand. The surface is a pale gray circle above him. He kicks harder. His vision tunnels. He breaks the surface and gasps air. He survives. 104 men cycle through 4 tubes over 90 minutes in total darkness, except for battle lanterns. The torpedo men manage the queue and time each escape. One man enters, seals door, floods tube, opens outer door, ascends. 45 seconds later, the next man enters. The rhythm is relentless. Some men hesitate at the tube entrance. others push them in. There is no time for fear. Seawater continues to rise in the torpedo room. By the 60th minute, water is neck deep and men tread water while waiting their turn. Suvorov and the executive officer go last, after ensuring every other man has entered a tube. The torpedo men exit in the final group. The last man seals the inner door behind him and floods the tube. K-429 is empty now, a steel tomb resting on the seabed with 16 men still inside who never made it to the torpedo room. 16 men do not make it. According to official records, 14 died instantly when the engine room flooded in the initial moments after surfacing. During the escape itself, some reportedly lose consciousness in the tube when the pressure spike ruptures eardrums and triggers shock. Their bodies remain wedged in the tubes, blocking further escapes until torpedo men pull them back inside. Others are believed to have ascended too fast and suffered arterial gas embolism when expanding air enters the bloodstream and blocks circulation to the brain. They convulse underwater and sink back toward the wreck. A few never emerge from the outer door, either unable to find the rope guide in total darkness or too weak to pull themselves through the 7-meter tube. Their bodies remain inside K-429 when the last survivor surfaces. Surface vessels from the exercise group recover survivors suffering hypothermia, decompression sickness, and ruptured eardrums. 104 men are pulled from the water alive. 16 are dead. And the Pacific Fleet immediately convenes an investigative board to determine who will be blamed. The Pacific Fleet salvage team refloats K-429 6 weeks later. Divers attach lift bags to the hull and pump compressed air into the ballast tanks. The boat rises slowly from 40 meters and breaks the surface bow first. Tugboats take her in tow and bring her to the naval yards at Vilyuchinsk, near Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. The hull is intact, but the interior is destroyed. Seawater has corroded electrical systems and flooded the reactor compartment. The bodies of the 14 who died in the initial flooding are recovered during the inspection. K-429 is placed in dry dock for damage assessment. Engineers estimate repairs will take 2 years and cost millions of rubles. But the political damage is already done. Western media has reported the sinking and the Soviet Navy needs a scapegoat. The technical investigation identifies the snorkel valve failure and the stuck ballast fence, but the conclusions are classified. The court-martial will focus on crew error, not systemic failure. Captain Nikolai Suvorov faces court-martial in September 1983 on charges of negligence and failure to maintain watertight integrity. His defense presents the written protest he filed before departure, listing the 17 system deficiencies and requesting delay. The court rules the protest inadmissible as evidence. Soviet naval doctrine holds that a captain's duty to maintain ship safety is absolute, regardless of orders received or command pressure applied. The court states that Suvorov should have refused the sailing order outright and accepted court-martial for insubordination if he believed the boat was unsafe. By complying with the order, he assumed full liability for the outcome. The prosecution presents testimony from Pacific Fleet staff officers who state the exercise could not be delayed. None of them are charged. Suvorov is convicted. The message is clear. Captains who obey unsafe orders will be blamed. Captains who refuse orders will be prosecuted. There is no third option. Suvorov is convicted and sentenced to prison. The exact length of his sentence varies across sources, but the verdict itself establishes a binding precedent within the Soviet submarine force. Submarine commanders cannot cite command pressure as a defense. According to historical accounts, written protests were suppressed or disregarded by the court. Orders from superior authority do not mitigate captain liability. The doctrine is absolute. Future captains read the verdict and understand the message. If you protest an unsafe order in writing and then comply, you will be prosecuted for the outcome. If you refuse the order outright, you will be prosecuted for insubordination. The only safe choice is to never be in a position where the choice must be made. The precedent silences dissent. captains stop filing written protests. Unsafe boats go to sea. The institutional failure that killed 16 men aboard K-429 becomes doctrine. K-429 sits pierside in Vladivostok for 18 months, awaiting repair funds that never arrive. The boat is a low priority. The scandal has made her politically toxic. Repair budgets are diverted to newer hulls. In September 1985, with hull valves left open and no watchstander assigned, the boat floods again and sinks at the pier. A second loss of the same vessel. The sinking is discovered only when a passing sailor notices the conning tower is underwater. Salvage crews refloat her again, but the damage is total. K-429 is declared a constructive total loss and eventually scrapped. The second sinking is farcical. A submarine cannot sink at a pier under controlled conditions unless negligence is complete. But that is exactly what happens. The boat that was forced to sea unready and then blamed for sinking becomes the boat that sinks again through sheer institutional neglect. The absurdity is not lost on the submarine force. The double sinking of K-429 becomes shorthand within the Soviet submarine force for institutional rot. A boat forced to sea unready despite written protest. A captain prosecuted for obeying orders. 16 men dead in an escape that succeeded for 88 others only because of individual courage, not institutional support. A salvaged wreck left to sink again at the pier through negligence. And a doctrine that makes future disasters inevitable by silencing the captains who see them coming. K-429 is not remembered as a mechanical failure. The snorkel valve could have been tested. The ballast vents could have been fixed. The crew could have been trained. Every deficiency was known before departure. The failure was not technical, it was systemic. A system that prioritizes exercise schedules over crew safety. A system that prosecutes the officers who object. A system that loses the same boat twice and learns nothing. Of the 104 men who survived the initial sinking, many were reportedly returned to service, though the physical toll limited some of their future duties. Many suffered permanent hearing loss from ruptured eardrums. Some developed chronic decompression injuries. A few received commendations for their role in the escape, though the commendations were not publicized. Captain Suvorov served his sentence and was released, his career over. While Suvorov's oral protests to his superiors are well documented, any written record of his objections is believed to remain within classified Soviet archives. The maintenance logs that documented the pre-sale deficiencies remain classified. The court-martial transcript was not made public. Western naval analysts studied the incident and drew their own conclusions about Soviet submarine safety culture. But inside the Soviet Navy, the lesson was simpler. Do not protest in writing. Do not refuse orders. And if your boat sinks, you will be blamed. K-429 rests in a scrapyard. The 16 dead are buried. The doctrine that killed them remains in force.